Be my date for one night, her assistant dared the billionaire CEO. Then she asked her to stay. Hello everyone. Before we dive into today's heartfelt story of two women whose lives become intertwined through an unexpected invitation, I have one small favor to ask. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another emotional journey with us. It only takes a moment, it is completely free, and your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories filled with love, resilience, healing, and unforgettable moments between women. We truly appreciate every one of you. And before we begin, let us know where you are watching from today. Share your city or country in the comments below because we love seeing our amazing community from around the world. Thank you so much for being here. Now let us meet the woman whose life was about to change with a single daring invitation. The loneliest people are often the ones everyone believes have everything. My name is Eleanor Brooks, and for 15 years the business world had celebrated me as the woman who never lost. Financial magazines called me the Iron Architect of American innovation. News anchors admired my relentless discipline. Investors trusted my instincts with billions of dollars. And every Monday morning the glass headquarters of Brooks Global welcomed thousands of employees who believed I held every answer. They saw tailored suits, confident speeches, private jets, and boardrooms where every decision carried the weight of fortunes. What they never saw was the silence waiting for me every evening after the final meeting ended. Success filled my calendar, but it never filled the empty chair across my dining table. At 48, I had learned how to negotiate acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, yet I had forgotten how to let someone truly know me. Every morning began the same way. My alarm sounded at exactly 5:30. I ran 3 miles on the treadmill overlooking the Chicago skyline, reviewed overnight market reports while drinking black coffee, and arrived at headquarters before sunrise. Precision had become my safest habit because emotions were impossible to control. The executive floor was already alive by the time I stepped off the private elevator. Assistants organized schedules, attorneys carried stacks of contracts, and department heads waited outside my office hoping for 5 minutes of my attention. Everyone needed something from the CEO. Very few ever wondered what the woman behind the title might need herself. 6 weeks earlier, Human Resources had assigned a new executive assistant to my office after my longtime assistant retired. Her name was Claire Bennett. She was 32, remarkably organized, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that never crossed into arrogance. Unlike many people who worked around powerful executives, Claire never seemed intimidated by expensive offices or impressive titles. She treated everyone with the same calm respect, whether speaking to the receptionist in the lobby or to me before an international board meeting. At first, I barely noticed her beyond the flawless schedules and perfectly prepared briefing folders that somehow appeared exactly when I needed them. But little things gradually caught my attention. She remembered the names of security guards. She asked the cafeteria staff about their families. She noticed when an exhausted intern skipped lunch and quietly left a sandwich on the young woman's desk without expecting recognition. Kindness, I realized, was simply the way Claire moved through the world. One rainy Thursday afternoon, after nearly 12 straight hours of meetings, I walked into my office to find a small paper bag sitting beside my laptop. There was no expensive gift inside. Only a warm bowl of homemade chicken soup and a handwritten note that read, "You missed lunch again. Even CEOs deserve to eat." I looked through the glass wall toward Claire's desk. She was answering a phone call, completely focused, never looking up to see whether I had found her quiet gesture. For reasons I could not explain, that simple bowl of soup unsettled me more than any hostile shareholder ever had. It reminded me that someone had noticed I was human before remembering I was powerful, and I wasn't prepared for how deeply that realization would stay with me. I had no idea that within a few days, one unexpected invitation would challenge every carefully constructed wall I had spent years building around my heart. The following Monday began with the kind of organized chaos that usually energized me. Television crews were setting up in our lobby for an interview about Brooks Global's newest sustainability initiative. Department heads crowded the executive conference room preparing quarterly reports, and my calendar contained exactly 18 meetings before 6 o'clock. Everything was proceeding according to plan until our communications director entered my office carrying a concerned expression. "There is one problem," she said carefully. The Harrison Foundation Gala moved the seating arrangements. Every chief executive is expected to arrive with a guest for the opening presentation. I barely looked up from the financial projections on my screen, then assigned someone from the leadership team. She hesitated. The organizer specifically requested a personal guest, not another executive. They are highlighting community partnerships and personal leadership. I exhaled slowly, already feeling another unnecessary complication added to an exhausting week. Personal appearances had always been the easiest part of my job to fake. Smile. Shake hands. Deliver the speech. Leave before anyone asked questions that mattered. I will handle it, I replied, dismissing the conversation. The truth was I had no idea how. By lunchtime, several well-meaning colleagues had quietly suggested names, each recommendation feeling more like a business arrangement than genuine companionship. Every option reminded me that I had spent years building professional relationships, while allowing personal ones to fade into distant memories. As the afternoon stretched on, I found myself staring through the glass wall toward Claire's desk more often than I intended. She remained focused despite the nonstop phone calls, calmly solving scheduling conflicts that would have overwhelmed most people. Around 4 o'clock, she stepped into my office carrying revised travel documents for an upcoming New York meeting. She noticed the unopened invitation, lying beside my keyboard. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. I surprised myself by answering honestly. Apparently I need to attend a gala with someone who actually wants to be there. Claire smiled with quiet amusement instead of sympathy. "That sounds more difficult than negotiating a merger." I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound felt unfamiliar, almost foreign inside these walls. She looked pleasantly surprised that she had managed to draw it out of me. "Maybe you should think of it differently," she said while organizing the folders on my desk. "Maybe it is just one evening where you are allowed to be a person instead of a title." I leaned back in my chair. Easy advice from someone who is not expected to represent an international company. Claire tilted her head, pretending to consider the problem with complete seriousness. "All right then," she said. "If everyone else is making this so complicated, I have a solution." I raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" She folded her arms with a playful confidence I had never seen before. "Let me be your date for one night." The room became unexpectedly quiet. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Claire's smile widened as she realized how stunned I looked. "I am kidding," she added quickly. "Mostly. You would have someone trustworthy beside you. Nobody would spend the evening trying to impress you. And I already know your schedule better than anyone." I should have thanked her for the joke and returned to work. That would have been the predictable response. Instead, I looked at the invitation again, then back at the woman standing across my desk whose kindness had already begun changing the atmosphere of my carefully controlled world. "Claire," I said softly, surprising both of us, "what if I accepted your offer?" Claire blinked twice, searching my face for any sign that I was teasing her, but I simply waited for her answer. A soft laugh escaped her lips before she realized I was completely serious. "You are actually asking me?" she said. I nodded. "Only if you are comfortable. You can say no, and tomorrow everything returns to normal." She studied me for several quiet seconds, and for the first time since she had started working beside me, I felt strangely vulnerable. Board members had challenged my decisions, competitors had questioned my leadership, and investors had doubted billion-dollar strategies. Yet none of those moments had ever made my heartbeat feel as uncertain as waiting for one assistant to answer a simple invitation. Finally, Claire smiled, not with excitement over attending a glamorous gala, but with the warmth of someone accepting another person's trust. "All right," she said. "One evening. We survive the speeches, smile for the cameras, and then we both go home." I found myself smiling back before I even realized it. "It is a deal." The rest of the afternoon passed differently than any workday I could remember. Claire remained as professional as ever, arranging travel confirmations, reviewing presentation notes, and coordinating meetings, but every now and then our eyes met for just a moment before we both returned to work. Nothing inappropriate happened. Nothing needed to. Something invisible had shifted between us, replacing formal distance with quiet understanding. 2 days later, the Harrison Foundation Gala arrived. Chicago glowed beneath a crisp autumn evening, and the lights reflecting across the river made the city appear softer than usual. I rarely notice beauty outside quarterly reports and construction projects, but that evening everything seemed unusually vivid. My driver stopped in front of Claire's apartment building exactly at 6:30. She stepped outside wearing a simple navy blue evening dress that reflected elegance without trying to compete with anyone else in the room. There were no extravagant diamonds, no designer statement pieces, only understated confidence that somehow drew more attention than luxury ever could. As she settled into the back seat beside me, she smiled nervously. I suddenly remembered I have never attended a Billionaire charity gala before. I laughed quietly. Neither have I. She looked confused. You have attended dozens. I shook my head. I have attended as the CEO. Tonight I would like to attend as Eleanor. Claire looked at me with gentle surprise before replying softly. Then, I am happy to spend the evening with Eleanor. Those words stayed with me during the entire drive. At the hotel ballroom, photographers called my name from every direction, while flashes illuminated the entrance. Usually I walk through those moments without emotion, but this time I noticed Claire remaining composed despite the unfamiliar attention. She never clung to my arm, never appeared overwhelmed, and never tried to become part of the spotlight. She simply walked beside me with quiet confidence, greeting every volunteer and event coordinator with genuine kindness. Inside the ballroom, executives discussed stock prices while philanthropists compared charitable projects, yet Claire seemed more interested in speaking with scholarship recipients than with influential donors. I watched her kneel beside an elderly woman whose wheelchair had become caught on the edge of a carpet, gently helping without drawing attention to herself. Moments later she was laughing with college students who had received grants from the foundation, listening far more than she spoke. It struck me that although I had spent years donating millions of dollars, Claire possessed something money alone could never purchase. She made people feel seen. As dinner began, the foundation chairman approached our table and smiled warmly. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "your guest has already made more friends tonight than most of our board members have managed in 10 years. Claire laughed with slight embarrassment while I looked at her with growing admiration. Somewhere between the opening speeches and the first course, I realized I was no longer thinking about public appearances, shareholder expectations, or tomorrow's meetings. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was simply grateful that someone had chosen to sit beside me. The evening continued with effortless conversations, but the moment that remained with me happened far from the ballroom. During a short break between speeches, I stepped onto the hotel terrace hoping for a few minutes of quiet away from cameras and expectations. The cool Chicago air carried the scent of autumn, and the city lights shimmered across the river like thousands of tiny promises. A moment later, the terrace door opened behind me. I did not have to turn around to know it was Claire. She walked over without interrupting the silence, resting her hands lightly on the balcony railing while keeping a respectful distance. "You disappear the same way every overwhelmed person does," she said with a gentle smile. "You look for somewhere quiet." I looked out at the skyline. "Is it that obvious?" She nodded. "Only if someone is paying attention." Her answer settled somewhere deeper than I expected. For years, people had paid attention to my accomplishments, my investments, my public image, and every decision that affected the company. Very few had ever paid attention to me. We stood there for another minute before I asked the question that had quietly followed me all evening. "Why did you agree to come tonight?" Claire smiled at the lights below. "Because I thought you needed one evening where nobody expected you to be extraordinary." I laughed softly. "That sounds impossible." She shook her head. "No. I think you have spent so much time proving your worth that you forgot you never had to earn the right to simply exist." Her words caught me completely off guard. Nobody in my professional world spoke like that. Every conversation revolved around results, performance, growth, or strategy. Claire spoke about people. She always had. Before I could respond, the ballroom coordinator stepped onto the terrace looking relieved. "Ms. Brooks, we are ready for your recognition ceremony." I nodded and followed him back inside, but Claire's words echoed in my thoughts all the way to the stage. The chairman introduced me with a long list of achievements, charitable donations, and business milestones. Applause filled the room as I accepted the crystal award placed in my hands. Normally, I would have delivered the prepared remarks waiting inside my jacket pocket. Instead, I looked across the audience until I found Claire sitting quietly near the back of the ballroom. Then I folded the speech and placed it on the podium. People often ask me the secret behind success. I began. For many years I believed the answer was discipline, long hours, and never allowing yourself to appear vulnerable. Tonight I realize there is another answer. Success means very little if you forget how to see the people standing beside you. Every company grows because ordinary individuals choose kindness, loyalty, and compassion every single day. Those qualities rarely appear in annual reports, but they are the reason organizations survive difficult seasons. The audience applauded again, though this time the applause felt different. It no longer celebrated a billionaire executive. It celebrated something honest. As the evening ended, guests gradually departed while hotel staff cleared the tables. Claire and I walked toward the entrance together beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. "That was not the speech you rehearsed," she observed. I smiled. "No, it was not." She laughed quietly. "I think it was better." Outside, a gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the sidewalk as the driver opened the car door. We climbed into the back seat, both unusually quiet after everything that had happened. Halfway across the city, Claire glanced toward the passing skyline and said almost absent-mindedly, "You know, Eleanor, tonight was never really about pretending to be someone's guest." I turned to look at her. She met my eyes with the same calm sincerity that had slowly dismantled every wall I had built around myself. It was about reminding someone they do not have to face every room alone. For reasons I could not fully explain, those simple words stayed with me long after the lights of the hotel disappeared behind us, and I quietly wondered whether the most important partnership of my life had begun with something neither of us had expected. Monday morning arrived with its familiar rhythm, but nothing inside Brooks Global felt quite the same to me anymore. The gala had ended, yet its quiet impact lingered in unexpected ways. I found myself noticing details that had escaped me for years. The receptionist who greeted every visitor by name. The maintenance crew polishing the lobby floors before sunrise. The young analysts carrying coffee cups almost as large as their laptops. They had always been there. I had simply been moving too fast to truly see them. Claire noticed the change before anyone else. She placed my morning schedule on the desk and smiled. "You looked at people on your way in today." I glanced up from my calendar. Was I supposed to hide that? She laughed softly. "No. It is just different." Before I could answer, my office phone rang. The caller identification displayed the chairman of the board. His voice was unusually tense. "Eleanor, we need an emergency meeting in 30 minutes. My stomach tightened. Emergency meetings rarely delivered good news. By 9 o'clock, every board member had gathered around the long walnut conference table overlooking downtown Chicago. Financial reports covered every screen. The chief financial officer spoke first. "One of our largest international partners has suspended negotiations after rumors about supply chain issues surfaced over the weekend." The media picked up the story before we could respond. Another executive added, "Our stock opened down almost 9% this morning." Silence settled over the room. Everyone looked toward me, waiting for certainty. That had always been my role. The woman with the answers. The woman who never hesitated. I calmly assigned investigation teams, scheduled investor calls, and instructed our legal department to verify every public claim. My voice sounded steady, but inside I could feel the weight of thousands of employees depending on decisions made within the next few hours. The meeting stretched into the afternoon. Every update seemed to create two new problems. Television commentators questioned my leadership. Market analysts predicted instability. By 5 o'clock I realized I had not eaten anything since dawn. As the last executive left my office, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for just a moment. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. Claire stepped inside carrying 2 paper cups of hot tomato soup and a small bag from the neighborhood bakery. "Before you say you are too busy," she said, placing everything on the coffee table, "I already blocked 20 minutes on your calendar." I almost protested out of habit, but the exhaustion in my own reflection on the office window convinced me otherwise. We sat across from each other in the small seating area instead of behind the executive desk. Outside, the city slowly faded into evening while rain tapped softly against the glass. "Does it ever stop feeling heavy?" Claire asked quietly. I looked at the soup in my hands before answering. "No. You simply become better at carrying it." She considered that for a moment before gently shaking her head. "I do not think that is how it is supposed to work." I looked at her curiously. "Then how is it supposed to work?" She smiled with the same calm sincerity that had stayed with me since the gala. "Sometimes you let someone carry part of it with you." Her words lingered between us. No financial model had ever explained leadership that way. No business school had ever taught that lesson. Yet somehow it felt truer than every management book lining the shelves behind my desk. Before either of us could say anything more, my phone vibrated with an urgent message from corporate security. New evidence suggested that someone inside Brooks Global had intentionally leaked confidential information to damage the company. I slowly lowered the phone, realizing the greatest threat might not be outside our organization after all, but somewhere much closer than any of us had imagined. The next 48 hours tested every belief I had about leadership. Investigators quietly reviewed internal communications, while the executive team worked around the clock to reassure investors that Brooks Global remained stable. Every hallway conversation seemed shorter. Every smile felt cautious. Rumors traveled faster than facts, and uncertainty settled over the headquarters like heavy winter clouds. I refused to let panic guide my decisions, but I also knew trust, once questioned, was painfully difficult to rebuild. Claire remained exactly as she had been from the day she arrived. Calm, methodical, kind. She organized emergency meetings, coordinated confidential interviews, and somehow found time to check on employees who looked overwhelmed. More than once I noticed people leaving her desk looking lighter than when they had arrived. She possessed an unusual gift. She never promised easy answers, but she always made people believe tomorrow could still be better than today. Late Wednesday afternoon, our chief security officer entered my office carrying a sealed folder. His expression told me the news before he spoke. "The leak came from an executive account," he said quietly. "However, someone accessed the files using credentials that should not have been available." I opened the folder and froze. The access records pointed directly to my executive office. More specifically, they pointed to Claire's workstation. The room became painfully still. I knew the evidence looked convincing, but every instinct inside me rejected the conclusion. Claire had never given me a single reason to doubt her integrity. Before I could respond, another board member walked in. "Until this investigation is complete," he said firmly, "her system access must be suspended immediately." I looked through the glass wall toward Claire's desk. She was helping one of the junior analysts understand a complicated travel reimbursement form, smiling with the same patience she showed everyone. She looked completely unaware of the storm moving toward her. Minutes later, I asked her to step into my office. She noticed the expressions on our faces immediately. "Something happened," she said softly. I handed her the report without saying a word. She read every page carefully, her eyes never rushing, her breathing never changing. When she finished, she looked directly at me. "You do not believe I did this?" It was not a question. I answered honestly. "No, I do not." One of the board members interrupted. "Belief is not evidence." Claire nodded with remarkable composure. "He is right." Then she did something I never expected. She removed her employee identification badge and gently placed it on my desk. If my stepping away helps protect the company while the truth is uncovered, then that is what should happen. I immediately shook my head. "Claire, you do not have to accept responsibility for something you did not do." She offered a small reassuring smile. "I am not accepting responsibility. I am protecting the people who depend on this company. If employees see leadership arguing while the investigation continues, confidence disappears. Sometimes the right decision is also the hardest one." My chest tightened. I had spent years believing sacrifice meant working longer hours or making difficult financial choices. Claire showed me another kind entirely. She was willing to lose the position she loved to preserve stability for thousands of people she barely knew. She quietly gathered the few personal items from her desk, including a framed photograph of her parents and a small potted succulent that had somehow survived months in the office. Before leaving, she turned back toward me. "Find the truth, Eleanor," she said gently. "Do not waste time defending me. Just find the truth." Then she walked through the lobby with her head held high while confused employees watched in silence. I remained standing behind the office window long after she disappeared through the revolving doors, realizing that the strongest person in the building had never been the billionaire in the corner office. It had been the woman willing to walk away without bitterness, because she believed honesty would eventually find its way home. For the next 3 days, the office felt strangely unfamiliar. Claire's desk remained perfectly organized, exactly as she had left it, yet the quiet absence of her steady presence echoed through every corner of the executive floor. Employees continued doing their jobs, but something essential was missing. I caught myself looking toward her empty chair countless times, almost expecting her to appear with a revised schedule or a thoughtful reminder that I had forgotten to eat lunch. Instead, there was only silence. I refused to accept that the investigation was over simply because the evidence appeared convincing. Every evening after the board meetings ended, I stayed behind with the cybersecurity team, reviewing server logs, security camera footage, and authentication records line by line. Hours turned into nights. Coffee replaced sleep. The more we examined the data, the more one detail refused to make sense. Claire's credentials had been used while security cameras clearly showed her attending an employee orientation. On another floor, the timestamps overlapped. It was impossible for her to be in both places at once. That single inconsistency became the thread that unraveled everything. By Friday afternoon, the forensic specialists uncovered the truth. A senior executive from another division had secretly copied Claire's login credentials weeks earlier after briefly borrowing her workstation during a software update. He had expected the investigation to end quickly, believing no one would question digital records that appeared complete. Instead, the deeper analysis exposed every step he had tried to hide. The leak had never come from Claire. She had simply been the easiest person to frame because everyone trusted her enough to overlook how carefully her routine had been studied. I immediately called an emergency board meeting. The evidence spoke for itself. Every accusation against Claire collapsed within minutes. Some directors looked embarrassed. Others remained silent, unable to meet my eyes. One finally said, "We should invite her back immediately." I stood slowly from my chair. "No, irraplia." The room became still. "Not yet." Confused expressions spread around the table. "She deserves more than a phone call asking her to return as though nothing happened." Without waiting for another opinion, I left the building carrying only my coat and the small employee badge Claire had placed on my desk. Her address was still saved in the confidential personnel records, and for the first time in years I drove myself instead of asking for a company driver. The autumn sun was beginning to set when I arrived at her apartment building. Through the front window of a neighborhood community center across the street, I noticed familiar blonde hair. Claire sat at a long table helping several middle school students with homework, smiling exactly the way she had smiled inside our office. She had lost her position, yet somehow she had not lost her generosity. I waited until the children left before walking inside. She looked up, surprised but completely calm. "Hello, Eleanor," she said warmly, as though we had simply missed a meeting instead of enduring the most difficult week of our professional lives. I placed her identification badge gently on the table between us. "The investigation is over," I said. "Your name has been completely cleared." She looked at the badge for several quiet seconds before lifting her eyes to mine. "I am glad the truth finally arrived." I nodded, feeling words catch in my throat that no business negotiation had ever prepared me to speak. "Claire, I did not come here to ask you to return as my assistant." She tilted her head slightly, waiting without interruption. I took a slow breath. "I came because somewhere along the way I stopped looking forward to successful quarters and started looking forward to seeing you every morning. If you choose to come back, I hope it will not be because of your old job. I hope it will be because you are willing to stay in my life, not as the person managing my calendar, but as the person who reminded me that even the strongest hearts deserve someone beside them." Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, as though weighing every emotion before allowing it to become a decision. The community center had grown quiet, leaving only the soft hum of the lights above us and the distant laughter of children playing outside. She gently turned my employee badge over in her hands before placing it back on the table. You know, she said with a small smile. When I walked out of Brooks Global, I thought the hardest part would be losing my job. It was not. The hardest part was believing that someone I respected might never truly know who I was. Her words settled heavily between us. I took a slow breath. I should have found the truth sooner. She looked at me with surprising tenderness. You never stopped looking. That mattered more than you realize. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to admit something without hiding behind confidence or achievement. I have spent my entire career believing that being responsible meant carrying everything alone. I thought asking for help was weakness. I thought letting people get close only created risks. Somewhere along the way I confused isolation with strength. Claire's smile softened. Then maybe both of us learned something. I looked at her. Curiously, what did you learn? She folded her hands together. That sometimes people with the strongest walls are simply waiting for someone patient enough to knock instead of trying to break them down. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. You make complicated things sound simple. They usually are, she replied. People make them complicated because honesty feels scary. We walked out of the community center together, just as the last rays of sunlight painted the Chicago skyline in warm shades of gold and orange. Neither of us hurried toward the parking lot. For the first time there was no meeting waiting, no speech to prepare, no investors expecting answers. There was only a peaceful walk through a neighborhood where children rode bicycles, families carried groceries home, and ordinary life continued without caring about stock prices or executive titles. I realized how many years I had spent missing moments exactly like this. We stopped at a small coffee shop on the corner. The owner greeted Claire by name and immediately began preparing her usual cinnamon tea before she even ordered. Watching the exchange made me smile. Everyone seems to know you, I said. Claire shrugged modestly. I just try to remember people. The owner placed my coffee in front of me and smiled. Anyone who is a friend of Claire's is always welcome here. Friend. The word lingered in my thoughts. It felt honest, comforting, and somehow full of possibility. As we sat beside the window watching the evening settle over the neighborhood, our conversation drifted away from business entirely. We talked about childhood memories, favorite books, family traditions during Thanksgiving, and the dreams we had quietly set aside while chasing other responsibilities. I learned that Claire volunteered at the community center every Wednesday because a retired teacher had once believed in her when her own family struggled financially. She learned that I had loved painting as a teenager, but had abandoned it after convincing myself there was never enough time. Maybe there still is, she said gently. I smiled. Maybe. When we finally stepped back outside, the city lights reflected across the sidewalks. After a brief autumn drizzle, I looked at Claire with a certainty that felt calmer than excitement and deeper than admiration. I still hope you will come back, I said softly. She met my eyes with quiet confidence. If I do, it cannot be the same as before. I nodded immediately. It should not be. She smiled, the kind of smile that carried hope instead of promises. Then let us begin again, Eleanor. Not by pretending the difficult days never happened, but by choosing to build something stronger because they did. As we walked toward our cars, I realized that success had once meant reaching the top alone. Now it meant finding someone willing to walk beside me, one honest step at a time. 1 year later, I stood once again beneath the bright lights of the Harrison Foundation Gala. But this time everything felt different. The same ballroom welcomed business leaders, educators, and community advocates from across the country. Yet the atmosphere no longer reminded me of expectations I had to meet. It reminded me of the evening that quietly changed the direction of my life. Brooks Global had fully recovered from the crisis. Investor confidence had returned, new partnerships had been established, and the company had recorded one of its strongest years in history. Strangely, none of those accomplishments felt like my greatest success anymore. My proudest achievement stood only a few feet away, speaking with a group of scholarship recipients whose smiles reflected the same hope I had first noticed on the executive floor many months earlier. Claire had accepted my invitation to return, but not as my executive assistant. Together we created the Brooks Leadership and Opportunity Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping women rebuild their careers after personal or professional setbacks. Claire became its executive director, bringing the same compassion she had always carried into every room. I remained the chief executive officer of Brooks Global, but I no longer measured success only by quarterly reports or market value. We measured it by the number of lives that found new opportunities because someone believed in them. During the evening's presentation, a young woman stepped onto the stage to share her story. She spoke about losing confidence after losing her job, about believing her future had disappeared, and about finding hope again through one of our foundation's career programs. As the audience applauded, I glanced toward Claire. She was not looking at the stage. She was watching the young woman with quiet pride, her eyes reflecting the same kindness that had first changed me over a simple bowl of soup. In that moment, I realized something profound. Real leadership is not about standing in front of people. It is about lifting them until they are able to stand on their own. Later that evening, after the guests had begun to leave, we stepped outside onto the familiar terrace overlooking the Chicago River. The autumn air felt crisp, carrying the comforting scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. I smiled as I leaned against the railing. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" I asked. Claire laughed softly. "You looked like someone carrying the entire world on your shoulders." I nodded. "And now?" She looked at me for a thoughtful moment before answering. "Now you remember that even the strongest people are allowed to share the weight." I reached for her hand, and she welcomed the gesture with a warm smile that needed no grand declaration. We stood there watching the city lights shimmer across the water, grateful not because life had become perfect, but because we had learned to face its imperfections together. Looking back, I often think about how everything began with one unexpected invitation and one ordinary act of kindness. Neither of us could have predicted where that path would lead. What I know now is this: wealth can build remarkable buildings, but only compassion can build lasting homes inside another person's heart. Titles may earn respect, but character earns trust. Success may fill your calendar, but genuine connection fills your life. If this journey taught me anything, it is that courage is not found in never needing anyone. Courage is found in opening your heart when experience tells you to keep it closed. Sometimes the greatest opportunity you will ever receive is not another promotion, another investment, or another award. Sometimes it is simply the chance to let someone stay, and in doing so, discover the version of yourself that was waiting to be found all along.